Hello everyone, thank you all for tuning into today's case. Today's case is going to be on Brandon Swanson. Brandon was a 19-year-old from Marshall, Minnesota. He went missing on May 14, 2008. After graduating from Marshall High School in 2007, he had enrolled at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Classes ended on May 13th, and he went out that night with some of his classmates to celebrate the end of the semester. This celebration was in the small town of Lind, 7 miles from Marshall. Brandon was drinking that night, but not a lot. Shortly after midnight on May 14th, Brandon left Lind to head back to his parents' home in Marshall, where he lived. Around 12:30 a.m., Brandon's car went into a roadside ditch, and he called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, asking them to pick him up. Brandon described his location as being on a rural road outside of Lind, about 10 miles from his parents' home. Brian and Annette stayed on the phone with their son while driving to pick him up. His parents later reported that Brandon seemed certain of his whereabouts and did not seem too disoriented. When Brian and Annette arrived at the location Brandon described, neither Brandon nor his car was there. Brian began flashing the lights of his pickup truck and instructed Brandon to do the same. Neither of them were able to see each other's flashing lights, and they both became frustrated, and an argument erupted. Brandon hung up on his mother, and when she called him back to apologize, he told his parents he was walking to Lind and would wait for them at his friend's house. Brian then drove Annette back home to Marshall so she could go to bed, and then drove towards Lind to pick up his son. Once again, Brian remained on the phone with Brandon, who was walking towards town. This call began at 2:23 a.m. and would be the last contact between the father and son. During the conversation, Brandon described his surroundings to his father, at one point stating he was walking along a fence line and could see the lights of town in the distance. At 3:10 a.m., Brandon shouted a curse word, and the call ended suddenly. Brian attempted to call his son back several times, but Brandon never answered again. The Swansons then contacted Brandon's friends and then searched the surrounding rural areas for any signs of Brandon. The early morning search turned up nothing, and at 6:30 a.m. on May 14th, Annette Swanson contacted the Lynn County Sheriff's Department for assistance. At first, the authorities were reluctant to search because Brandon was legally an adult, and they pointed out that it was not unusual for a 19-year-old to stay out all night. The authorities joined the search later that morning after realizing the seriousness of the situation. On the afternoon of May 14th, authorities located Brandon's Chevy Lumina by tracing his cell phone calls to a tower northwest of Marshall. No alcohol or illegal drugs are found in the vehicle. Nothing unusual was found in or around the vehicle. There was no significant trace evidence, no signs of blood, and no indication of a struggle. Unfortunately, authorities were unable to find footprints to indicate in which direction Brandon ventured on foot. After Brandon's car was located, the Lynn County Sheriff's Department sought the help of search dogs. The dogs led authorities to the banks of the Yellow Medicine River, which at the time of the disappearance was high and flowing fast. Because it was assumed Brandon had fallen into the river, the search focused around the Yellow Medicine River and the surrounding area. However, this area has now been ruled out because if Brandon did fall into the river, his body would have been washed down the river and eventually found. In the early weeks of the search in May and June 2008, land and air searches were conducted both by community volunteers and individuals from professional search organizations, but had no luck. The authorities believe that Brandon fell into a body of water and drowned. However, search dogs followed his scent to the river's edge, but continued walking on. This suggested that Brandon probably fell into the water, managed to get out, and continued walking. The temperature that night was around 39 degrees, so Brandon may have succumbed to hypothermia. Search dogs picked up the scent of human remains a few times, specifically in the area north of Porter near Mud Creek, but no body has ever been found. Police do not have any evidence of foul play and believe Brandon's remains are within the 122 square mile search area. After the searches and Annette Swanson was still struck by the initial response of the Lind police that her son had a right to be missing. When she told them how old he was. "I'm his mother, and I know when something was horribly wrong," she recalled later. And Annette and Brian were determined to make sure this never happened again. House Minority Leader Marty Seifert introduced the Brandon Law. Brandon's law was signed by Minnesota's Governor Tim Pawlenty on May 7, 2009. It took effect almost 2 months later on July 1st. The law will require law enforcement to take on a missing persons report without delay after notification of someone missing under dangerous circumstances. No matter the missing person's age, immediately conduct a preliminary investigation to determine if the person is missing and whether the person is endangered, and promptly notify all other law enforcement agencies of the situation. To this day, nobody knows what happened to Brandon or where he is. Honestly, this story is heartbreaking, like all the other stories I've read. And I just wish that his family can, get some justice and some closure as to what happened to Brandon. Thank you all for listening to today's story. Have a good day.